spirit, American values, and it's presented as something really permanent, whereas the philosophy of it was meant to be practical and empowering to the individual, maybe, to a certain extent, I guess. It was to break down what the legacy of philosophy made us feel stuck in the first place, especially in Europe. So it was a fresh start for the Americas, but I think as it evolved, in the absence of a history, it kind of, bit its own tail. So that's why you get sometimes compromising narratives, at least on the lower ends, where, people are not distilling William James or whoever they want to talk about.
Well, yeah, so the American intellectual tradition lacks a certain humility to it, right? Because like one of the key things that I kind of read in Kant is that he concedes to both sides, kind of like in a Russian doll type of way. When you talk about like a priori synthetic judgments, he's conceding to both sides that yes, there's this you can get a priori synthetic judgments by basically taking kind of like a empiricist worldview, but using a lens of a rationalist, right? So then that way, what is actually distilled is still within the realm of synthetic judgment, where you can still create stuff, but it has a structured filter that of how you receive things. So I mean, this is just a complex way of saying that there's a humility of understanding the nuances of things on a perception level, whereas rejecting this nuance allows you to be bold, daring, and it has a multiplier leverage effect, right? Because by being ignorant, you can kind of convince others to follow along with you in your ignorance, and you can kind of create this type of tribalistic, USA type of thing, and you could win markets that way, right? Like in a sense, like like the global trade market, when people decide to buy stuff, is a very US dominated psychology, right? And it's one that is used to great effect.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting to take this lens of saying, okay, let's take the market as an indicator of, philosophical success, in a sense. I'm not saying this is necessarily what you are saying, but I find it interesting because it's a narrative that is hidden in some of the sometimes arguments against the pragmatists.
You see this playing out like it used to be, in Socrates' times. So recently I reread some of the dialogues, and particularly his criticism on sophists, who were like, always basically misleading people into just creating an argument that sounds good so you can just win. So, and he's like, oh, well, this is, all this happening, but this is the danger of our society, that we are creating something that suits us, and it's called pragmatism to a certain extent. It's a practical form of thinking. Yes. So it's actually, it's happening right now. It's presented, this pseudo-philosophy is presented as pragmatism, when actually, if you look at actual pragmatism, it's more founded, more grounded, and it's got more value.
It's not the same. It's like it's on the surface, it looks similar, but it's actually, it's not. It's playing with the rules of the game to fake it, until you make it. So it works. Now it works. It sounds familiar. I don't know why.
So, just to take the fake it till you make it concept, I started a Twitter space this I think 2 hours ago, talking about this metaphor that is in Chinese folklore. It's called like the fox and the tiger. And so like the fox and the tiger out in the wild, they meet each other, and the fox is clearly weaker than the tiger, but the fox is
can outsmart the tiger, right? And so the tiger's about to kill the fox, and the fox says, "Wait, I am the strongest, animal in the jungle, and so it's best that you ally with me, if rather than make an enemy out of me, right?" And so, like, clearly, this is a lie. This is puffery. This is fake it till you make it. However, the tiger was curious and wanted to entertain this notion, and so tiger's like, "Fine, prove it to me." And so then the fox is like, "Fine, all you have to do is follow me, and then I will show you, how I can scare everybody, all the animals, away." And so then the tiger's like, "Okay, fine." And then throughout the day, the tiger was following the fox, and the fox was scaring everybody away. But the tiger was kind of dumb and didn't realize that they were scared by the tiger and not the fox, right? So it was because they were close together that this effect was there. And so then the tiger was like, later in the day, he was kind of thinking like, "Wait, aren't they just scared of me and not you?" And then the fox was like, wait, hold on. You see these humans over there? Usually they would come and shoot you, so they're not scared of you. But wait right here and just walk around the perimeter, and I will scare them off. So the fox started to like move towards the humans, and then the tiger walked, in the jungle, and then the humans saw the tiger, in the jungle, in behind the trees, and then they ran away because they were scared of the tiger. But the tiger, itself didn't have the right strategy to scare the humans, right? And so this is one of those weird instances where, yes, the fox lied, but at the end of the day, it devised a strategy and a situation in the game where they both benefited, right?
Yes, but it's when you play a game with a pipe. What is the name of the thing you throw with the the numbers on it? Dice. The dice.
Yeah.
Okay, when you use the dice with which is a tricked one, what you can actually make the rules always beneficial to you is I would say it's where, if we come back to the philosophy of fake it until you make it, is actually the game everyone is playing. Like, they are playing within the rules, but at the same time they are binding the rules, bending the rules to their benefits anyway. Because there's two aspects of it. Like, if you take the global market, and I'm specifically speaking about the global market in general, it's surprising to see so many US-based companies succeed in the global markets, because the global markets was basically invented by the US market. So it's always benefiting the one who made the rules, and and this is where European are probably more the tigers than the fox, because they want to play with the game that they, did not invent it and have no control over. So when they want to play with their rules to the other game that is not benefiting to them, then necessarily they will lose because they don't know how to bend the rules themselves, So then the Chinese arrived, and they are the new foxes. They know, they made the rule for them, but if we change this little bit, then it works for us way better than it works for them. And this is where they actually are smarter. Then what is the cost of that is not a totally separate question, right?
Yeah.
But we can leave it on the side for now. But you see, like, if you take what is emerged from the game, the kind of philosophy that it makes us use and accept in some form, is, like, from a philosophical standpoint, is questionable in many aspects. Right. So, of course, everything can be questioned and discussed. It's not really the point, but some criteria of what is appropriate and good can be put on, and we can look at this and say, okay, we understand why, but it doesn't make it, good anyway, right? So,
I think you're mixing two nuances of this fake it. There's fake it until you make it, and there's fake it to make it. And I think, one is about perseverance and living up to your story, maybe acquiring a skill in time and create this persona around yourself. Like you said, this America becoming the global market leader was a fake it until you make it. But actually, in a sense, it started with fake it to make it. You need to sound big and be big, and then you made it and you create that impression. But then there's the story of perseverance, maybe more drawn to let's say China, who have let's say compromised a lot until they became these mastodons of technology right now.
Yes.
Because they, like you say, they did take some of the rules and played it in a maybe questionable way of overworking others, whereas in the West these things weren't possible. This would be abusive to their employees, whereas in China it would be just a normal day of work to be efficient as possible and as productive as possible.
They have flexible notions to certain concepts that we don't have in Western countries.
Right?
No, not necessarily. Like what is an agreement is something fundamentally different. I would say in Asian countries in general than it is in Western countries. The formalism is totally different. There's different ways of formalism, and I would say the Asian one is way more flexible than what we can imagine in Western countries.
I would agree with that. I would say that the American system itself, it rewards flexibility, right? And so if you're a rigid manufacturer, factory type of employer, or a factory type mindset owner, you're not going to do well, because essentially you're planning for a 20-year life cycle of your sales, right? Of your manufacturing. You could get really efficient at your manufacturing, but you're not dynamic enough to change your marketing practices, to pivot your product to a different supplier if you get disrupted. And so the American system is really just about rewarding flexibility, rewarding dynamic spirit, rewarding the ability to adapt
to the cost of many,
to the cost of even having IP, even having strategic assets, right? Basically, America's really just about being a fox without a tiger. We just want to collect as many foxes as possible. That's the analogy of America, is we want to create culture that is attractive to foxes all over the world, and so all the foxes come here. China, however, has ultimate flexibility in a way that's kind of unexpected, which is that, like you said, agreements, right, can change over time. So basically, you're willing to take a lot of short-term losses. So basically being Apple's slave or something like that, right? Being a vendor manufacturer with very, very terrible unit economics, or at just break-even unit economics, basically, in order to basically gain a strategic advantage and asset, and then you basically leverage that asset and make it into a huge tiger 20 years from now, and just be like, hey, foxes, pay up, right? and being a fox ultimately is a great thing in the U.S. economic system because of the time value of money. You want to maximize IRR, you want to maximize net present value. If you have time discounted anything, Fox strategy is the way to go. But it does not optimize for long-term ROI. And the tiger strategy is ultimately what you perceive real power, right?
So what are the European countries then? because I don't feel like they're necessarily the tigers, and they're not necessarily the foxes. Not always, at least. Uh, I would say they are another kind of animals.
Yeah, I mean, look, European, like, well, if you take inventory, right? Like, just take like German Mittelstands. You know, they're gadget makers. They make gadgets of everything, very specialized, very high quality. So you think of them like, you know, like these monkeys that make tools and stuff like that, right? Really smart creatures. Ultimately, very diverse thinking. You know, can create in terms of, yeah.
Would be like rats.
I mean, rats, you name it. They just have like quite a lot of diversity, and it's really just about that they are trying to fit into the jungle. They really struggle actually to have power, right? To hold on to long-term power, because they're not in a strategic position. You know, every day they have to make trade-off decisions. You know, they don't have the luxury of having a surplus to where they can make a strategic decision where they can create cushions and invest in risky, you know, directionality, right? Like you don't get to, Europeans do not get to choose their evolutionary branch for the next 20 years. And that's actually one of the cases where essentially every European company, if you really look down into their balance sheet, are essentially just they're bankrupt and held on life support by the banks, right? So they're debt burdened entities.
Which is true for US companies also, you know.
Yes.
to an extent.
To an extent. So like I would say US companies, there's still a certain level of dynamism because they have an ecosystem in which even these zombie companies, right, can because they're large, they can still leverage their size with new technology to add some incremental and multiplicative effects. And that's what's neat about the American system, is that foxes tend to like other foxes. They eat with other foxes, they have dinner, and they share a lot of ideas with other foxes.
But it's also interesting to think about Europe as, you know, it's small. It's genuinely small as a geographical territory and as, you know, people, where you can't actually think as a blitzscaler in Europe because the market itself doesn't allow you to expand exponentially and do your own thing. Whereas America and, you know, Asian markets are really big. You can really look at the sky and be like, yeah, I can get that far.
Yeah, and there's a difference also in, like, there's so much like sometimes extreme diversity in a small, you know, area that's
you can't monopolize it.
Yeah, you don't get this kind of uniformity that you can find on. I'm not saying that there's no diversity in the US market or US country. It's not what I'm saying, but compared to like if you come to France and then you go to, I don't know, in the Dutch country, for instance, then you see the difference. Like it's really not the same way to think, not the same way to live.
What are you referring to exactly? Is it because I think in terms of the amount of product diversity, you get that in the US. You know, I had a lot of friends like, "There's nothing in Europe. You can't buy anything. There's no product diversity compared to how much shit you can buy in the US."
Yes, because
so in what terms is there that?
In terms of cultural differences. In terms of cultural differences, the differences are in a small place, I would say, in a small space. The differences are greater than in some other in some other countries. I'm not saying that it's always true, but like you don't find this common thing that is shared. Like Europe is not a country. right? It's not a country, and you can feel that when you live in Europe. That when you speak with someone that comes from another European country, you feel like it's totally different ways of seeing the world, and you don't have this. There's not necessarily a common thread. There's not something that people can share. Whereas I don't feel like it's like you take the U.S. market, for instance, a U.S. country. Like, yes, of course, there's differences by states, but you can find some kind of common thing that everyone agrees on across all the country, right? That you can use as a means to gain that market, right? Whereas if you compare to, like, yes, of course you have less shared products, but for the size of the countries themselves, you have like a lot of products. It's just that it's not the same. Like if you go in France and you go to another country, a European country, you won't find the same products. So compared to the size, it feels like there's less, right? This is what I would say. Like China is sometimes the commonality is it seems I never went to China, so I just read about it and I just try to understand from where I am. But from what I understand is sometimes artificially uniformed because of the government, right? So like I'm sure there's like a huge diversity because the country is so huge that it can only be the case. But then you have this layer on top that tends to uniformize a bit. Maybe you can.
But it's also because China is a very homogenous society, right? Like Chinese people don't want avocados that are imported from Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually one of the issues. Is like America is one that this is one of the weaknesses of America is that it kind of relies on this global market system in which we need to import, a lot of goods in order to keep everybody happy. And it's a very consumer-driven market. Now, compared to Europe, obviously Europe is default lower choices, right? Because you don't get the avocados, and I mean for good reason too. Like basically, European values is about like let's be sustainable. We don't need the avocados. It's nice every once in a while. Every season or so, we could get like an avocado, season, but and try some guacamole and have a party and whatnot. But overall, you don't need it year round. So you don't get it year round, right?
Yeah, that's funny because I do feel like it's a recent trend what you are describing, because France, for instance, I lived in France and can tell you they tried to be in this spirit of consumerism.
Toast, right? Basically, the whole point of like California is to create the mirage of American exceptionalism that you cannot get anywhere, and as long as you can maintain that mythology, then you will attract foxes ultimately, and that's
Well, the Europeans now have an approach because now they are trying to grow avocados inland in Belgium and in the Netherlands. So soon they won't rely on California's dream.
And I totally get that, but here's the thing: Europe is chasing false narratives in order to catch up, and that's not the recipe to win, right? Like everybody knows, at least when the EU was first formed into like this common euro thing, everybody knew back then that there was a strategic threat, right? Because if you look at the EU common market, it was a bigger GDP size compared to the US, and ultimately, if you always every year, and this is a thing that EU common market law practice does, is they ratchet up the efficiency year after year. So there's like a constant improving bar, so to speak, of real metrics, not just like fake, feel good, qualitative things, but quantitative things that improve standards year over year. And so this is actually a real strategic threat because America does not have these it's not it doesn't corral private sectors well enough to demand these things, and the U.S. does not use tax as a stick. It always used carrots, right? Stick and carrot. It always used carrots, tax breaks, as a way to incentivize, whereas EU can use both. And so there is some network effect in terms of EU having a framework of using carrot and stick that can create concise and consistent improvements year over year. But unfortunately, language barriers and whatnot and cultural differences clearly represent a huge barrier to continued EU success.
Yes, that's true. That's one of the reasons why there is an ongoing discussion in the EU to have a common language. And actually, there's a good argument for not choosing English. You know that there's one language that was created for the European
purpose of a common language.
Yes, it's the Esperanto.
I heard about this.
And that's a mixture of different language, European-based language that is apparently easier to learn than
basically
any of them.
To recreate a simpler Latin, right?
Yes,
the Pic Latin.
Yes, with roots also in German and English. So it's like a mixture of roots.
But if you apply this, I think all countries will be like, well, I want some of my words, and then everyone wants to chip in with some of their words to create this common language.
No, it exists. It already exists. It's and it's used in and it exists, and it's an official language that was developed for the European Union. They use it in their communication, so they create documents in Esperanto. So you can already find documents. All the official documents are available in Esperanto. It's just that no one speaks it. That's exactly. Yeah, but no one speaks it because there's no. There's not the politics that goes with this kind of good intentions. It's just if you do something like that, you need some form of ways to make it happen that goes just beyond the creation of it. That if you really want that, you need that the states under the EU needs to create some kind of incentives in school just for people to learn it, right? Or in business.
Involve the people, the younger generation to co-create, to actually be part of it.
Yes.
I think what's happening, like you're saying, this political limit. There was this recent discussion with Schengen, because Romania and Bulgaria have joined since 2007, but they still wouldn't let us in. And we were like, okay, fine, but we've met all the conditions, we've gone up and down. Of course we didn't, but on the paper it looks awesome. But the main issue that limits us is politics, is how other countries are feeling about us. There's not a common inclusive feeling from other countries towards each other because of this, and it creates this hierarchy. There are poor countries, there are like rich countries. We're better than you. There's an European language should unite us, but at the same time it should really remove that barrier. And while I understand that there are some, actual important implications for Romania not to be a part of Schengen and have still border control because Russia and, human trafficking and all that, we're like basically the tampon. But at the same time, it really, it belittles you. Like, this is the common conceptions around. In France, like France, Germany, Sweden, even Finland, they just didn't want to vote for this.
Yeah, but there's a problem here. I do feel like I'm not a huge fan of the European Union politics, especially how it is structured today. It's not democratic. It's far from it. Even like for all the bad that we can see from the other side of the Atlantic. Even the US has a better system in terms of democracy than the European Union, which is to personally is a shame. We should be ashamed from that constatation because we are a bunch of countries that feel of themselves being the place where true democracy was born, basically. So,
but I mean, experiments with good intentions, right? Like I think
Exactly.
that was the whole point of the EU
Yeah.
experiment was seeing if you can kind of unify multiple different cultures with a huge branding problem, right? Because like the difference between branding and marketing is, marketing, you have to pay money in order to influence, but branding is what happens if you stop spending money? What do they really think about you?
Yes.
And I think the EU has a branding problem amongst its neighbors, is that we don't really, like, Europeans don't think very highly of their neighbors when there's no marketing.
But I mean, technically they did market because a lot of the going up your game basically was made on European funds. So
yeah, so the marketing did its trick in terms of activating the whole political system, but now that
which heightened exactly it created the very problem it tried to solve. It further widened the gap of we're helping these beggars. They keep on begging for money and they're not doing anything. They're just buying BMWs.
Yes,
and not fixing the streets.
If you take back the history of creation of the EU, like it was first like for the commerce, right, for commercial reasons, and then on top of that should have been created some space for the politics that goes with it. Now the space has been left empty because no one wants to take the lead
responsibility.
Because with the lead comes with the responsibilities, and
it comes control, because
it comes control,
Germany
and
takes the lead officially. For example, what does that mean is German, entire Europe, and they're responsible to make
and people feels bad about that just for historical reasons, and but
even with that, the fact that I'm Romanian, I have Romanian identity. How can I let another country decide my future?
Exactly, but that's the true issue with all of that is now we let the space filled in by default with like some form of politics, but which is not meant.
It's those who had access. Like it's the rich people making decisions. It's those who are still
if you take which country has the biggest vote power in the union, like basically it's the biggest one with the biggest markets. So it's like it's really a dumb way to decide about stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a corporation, right?
Yes.
The person who owns the most shares get the most votes, and so it is a little bit regressive. And but again, ultimately, it's not a real political entity. It's an economic entity posing as a political entity, and maybe that is just the kind of the problem, is there is that inconsistency left unanswered.
Yes.
So if we were to take this community and put it in the European Parliament, and we from now on we have to decide. I think maybe we would do a much better job. I think what they need true designers. They hire people like Snowden from time to time, and they're doing some reports, but they're not actually using the power of design to design their own political system.
There's the new Bauhaus, right? There's this new Bauhaus initiative, which is some kind of some form of department, which exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Like I don't really know what they are doing, but they are participating in some initiative. But I agree. It comes back to one of the article that I wrote recently, with this, I was reacting to someone sharing a prompt for a workshop, and the prompt was about what if design replaced politics. And I had like this, reaction at first. Like it sounds weird as a framing. Like, right? It sounds really weird because politics is already designed. So I compare it to, like if you change the words, you could say, you could use like a product analogy, and you could say, oh, it is like if sitting has replaced the chair. Like it sounds dumb when you say it this way, right? And that's the issue. Like we don't see politics for what it is. It's a medium, right? It's an object. It's something we created just for others to interact with, other people and other systems, right? So, and I'm sure, like in Europe especially, we lost sight of this. Some form of tangible reality of the object for the shiny, glitterish stuff we see on the TV, And
I agree with that sentiment, though, that politics isn't an end to itself; it's a means to an end, right?
yes.
And really, the end that you're trying to achieve is ultimately like expressing the will of the people in a proper way, in a proper context, and giving people a way to vent.
And today politics, at least in some of the countries I experienced so far in Europe, when you talk, if we replace the words to fit what we are discussing, politics is made by politicians, right? Or this is what we believe it is, right? In most cases, so the politicians are the designers in some form, right? So once the politicians talk about their end goals, and then the medium they will need to create or change for that end goal to happen, what we see most of the time is they talk about themselves, not about the end goal, and they are not talking about what it means in terms of, we are not seeing the medium, we are not co-creating it in many ways.
Because in the EU we view Europe kind of views its politicians as celebrities, so it's very self-centered around this celebrity culture for politicians.
Yes.
So in the theory of information theory, you're not looking at the overall message transmitter, the medium, the noise, the receiver, and then the destination. All you're really focusing on is just the receiver and the destination.
Yes.
And there's not much of like, well,
yes.
you end up with a lot of distorted signal at the receiver end too. So you need to think about that whole system for a bit before you say something. Otherwise, you're just spouting out your own biases, right? And then, of course, European politicians hate each other at that point because they have different messages from their own different constituents.
Yes.
And this is the same with U.S. politicians too, is that they're in their own echo chambers being fed information that is just not consistent, right, with reality. So
there's one place where it's not like this, at least from what I know. Maybe there's other places like this, but at least one I experienced is Switzerland. First, because you can vote about anything, even the color of the trash bin, the public trash bin at the end of your street. You can vote for that, right? Yeah. So you can vote for about anything, and you have votation like that occurs like really, really often.
Well, you know why? It's because when you have bigger political systems that require leverage, it's very the attention is always to where is the most effective way and the most efficient way. So efficiency is about like how much resources you spend, and effective is prioritizes the outcome that you can that you can leverage, right? And this is true in all political systems, really, is that if you are the closest to the decision maker, but right before the decision maker. So basically, you don't want to be to the right side of the decision maker. You want to be on the left side of the decision maker, because if you're the right hand, you have to do what the decision maker says to do, right? But if you're right next to the decision maker on the left side, you whisper into the decision maker's ear, and you could be that filter, and you could basically be the decision maker. And so everybody is all about trying to position themselves right next to the decision maker. And that means that you have your noise amplifiers and you have your true signals, right? And so the incentive, or the game, really is positioning. It's not about the message. It's not about the quality of the message. It's all about being as close as possible to the left side of the decision maker, to the receiver. And then the receiver will actually take that message to the destination. So, usually you hire or you vote for somebody who's very competent.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody who has leadership skills, who has
So-
brought a company.
Yeah, in Switzerland, it's really interesting. I'm not praising the entire system, because there's a lot of issue with with Swiss system, political system. But at least what's one thing that is really interesting is like the entire system rely on two aspects, like people, the citizens taking decisions, right, and some other decisions being made by the politicians. And they try to find some kind of balance between the two. It's not always working, but it is interesting. And this disincentivizes politicians to be, outstanding public figures, because it makes less sense in such a system where everyone can make propose an idea and submit that to the entire Swiss population if they want. Like, you have some criteria to do so, but absolutely every citizen in Switzerland can do it. Like, so if you are not happy with something, you can propose a new law, or you can propose to change a law. Like, anyone has this kind of leverage, which is, obviously incentivizing people to hold too much power, or to give the impression that they have this kind of power, right?
Right. Well, the main thing that I really wanted to say is that any political system that is going to be successful in the next 100 years has to deprioritize the message positioning and has to reprioritize signal to noise ratio, right?
Yes.
That's ultimately the true bar to pass is that you have to disincentivize positioning. So if you are going to have to do positioning, position at the highest layer where you have to get to the mass people, right? So basically, position, if you want to have a system where there is positioning at stake, then make it to where you have to buy millions of dollars of political ads. Sure, there's a huge bar in terms of cost of ad, right? Like, basically the richest people can get their message across. Like, sure, that there's that problem. I mean, you can't go around with that, but the alternative is, lobbyists, the money will still be spent, and they'll be spent at the lobbying level, and it will all be about positioning right to the left, So at least if you have it where the message is distributed, even if it kind of, increases kind of the cost threshold of the messaging, at least it could be critiqued on the public level. And I think that's the most important aspect of it too.
Yeah, something that is really interesting, by the way, in Switzerland is like they have actually true political debate where people and politicians are on the same stage and they are discussing something I'd never seen in France, for instance, where people are just, shouting at each other and it's not a debate, like it's just an opposition of ideas. which is exactly not at all a true debate. And here in Switzerland, they are performing that, and they care about having, like, everyone needs to have access to the same quantity and quality of information from all sides to being able to make a decision. Like, if you are a citizen and you have to vote for something, you need to have access to a certain level of information in the same way for all the positions you should vote for. You should be able to vote for, right? Which is interesting, because that means that the political system inside, like, they provide directly to the citizen, neutral. They try to have, like, this kind of neutral position and say, okay, this is what they propose, this is what the counter proposition is, this is what the other counter proposition is, etc., etc. Which is, like, something, again, I never seen in France, for instance, or in Germany, which is interesting. And, when we discuss that with French people, for instance, they say, oh, what, a system like that won't work in France, because France is so big as a country compared to Switzerland that it would cost so much to do the same kind of thing, right? And when I hear that, I hear this, we were talking about, cost efficiency. And I find it interesting that the focus of the discussion then switch about these specific aspects of the political system. I don't know why the political system should be cost efficient. If it's performing well its work, the measure of efficiency should be about how well it performs its work. Like, if it costs 10 times what it costs today, but it's 10 times greater as an outcome, then it's worth the cost, right?
Not necessarily, because of Ricardo's law, right? Ricardo's law is law of comparative advantage. So even if you get a linear 10x 10x, an individual citizen, right, spending the same amount of time to research and vote, could have spent that time doing a 100x activity in some other economic form. So this is a counter argument, so to speak. And this is the key thing here too, is, at the end of the day, the American two-party system is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
In order to be considered a democracy. It's only a democracy by name. Really, it's just one party but two faces on it, right? But it's only one party system that advertises and wastes political dollars pretending to be a two-party system, when really it's creating a very evenly cut platform, so then it could still look 50-50, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting to see once some third party try to emerge how it was beat up and just,
But I mean, clearly there is a case to be said that in a duopoly, right, in a two-party duopoly, even if it's not political, even if it's just economical, a duopoly is more favorable than a triopoly, right? Like, it's better to reach that equilibrium with two and compromise than to have a third mix things up.
It's easier, right?
Yeah, and also, if you take Shannon entropy equation, right? Information theory and all that stuff. If you take the log base 2 and you just vary that from like a 0 to to infinity or whatever, that simulates the amount of parties you have, essentially the amount of choices you have within a system, right? And 2 is the highest number, is the highest Shannon entropy that you can get. That's an integer, right? At 1, you basically have an asymptote where it's negative infinity and a negative and a positive infinity, right? Because
at one, that's pure certainty. You have no choice. So it doesn't matter if you have perfect information or not. That is chosen for you, right? And out into the right, information entropy is just much lower, right? And so you have your German 6-party systems and whatnot. There's a lot of transaction involved, and it violates Ricardo's law of comparative advantage. So this is what ends up happening, where when you have an inefficient market, people compete, and this is the reason why you have status games, and this is the reason why we have political celebrities. That's why we have Schroders. That's why we have Merkels. It's all about status. It's because it's an inefficient market, and it's one where branding matters more than the actual information content.
Yeah, but having this inefficiency is what keeps us safe. In a sense that it gives us this weird sense of safety that if it's inefficient, they want to do everything so efficiently bad.
Yes, that's true. That's
that's
the perfect way to summarize what Switzerland is. Like, it's so slow at everything that by the time they make the decision, like, things have changed so much that it's not a problem anymore, right? That's
it's a form of like capitalist realism, like it just normalizes a problem to or a crisis, and everything moves so slow that you no longer feel the need to reject it or to object against it, because it's become part of your life, and you have to kind of stay on your toes if you want to set up and stand up for the specific law, for example.
I do think if you want to apply design reasoning to political, to basically resolve this efficiency algorithm and choice, you could probably apply some sort of mathematics to it as well, because at the end of the day, the most efficient form of democracy is not a 2-party system, but it's somewhere between a 2 and a 3, actually.
Like Lord of the Rings of Power.
It has to be between 2 and a 3. In fact, it's closer to 3. It's probably 2.7, ... because it's actually supposed to be E, because E actually has the property in which it can self-replicate when you integrate and when you do the derivative, right?
Well,
so,
in many countries, E is not one party; is a lot of small parties.
Yeah.
Right. But in a way, because it has a fractal self-similarity to it, that is what makes it efficient, because you replicate the structure rather than a platform. Because you cannot have like one party stand for all of these things that have some contradiction with one another, right? What you really need is just, at the end of the day, all of these small structures end up in a hierarchy, in which case you have to end up with just like 2.7 choices, right?
And it's also, giving you that that 0.7 can replace a whole, it just comes to power once, you're fed up of either or.
Once every 10 years, a third party should emerge, right? Just to shake things up. And it's not fair if the 2-party system continues to negotiate their platforms so that a third party doesn't emerge. That's not fair.
But it's where you need not an external, necessarily an external entity, but some kind of ways to mitigate the medium through which the 2 parties works, right? Because if the 2 party actually have ownership on the platform, well, they can negotiate whatever they want because it's their platform, right? They hold it, and there's no reason for them to let anyone else disrupt that, right?
And also,
this is where any form of political system has ways to prevent that kind of grip on the platform itself, right? Normally, but it's not always the case. But
You're expecting that the two parties are opposing each other.
yes.
And sometimes they're not. I mean, it was very funny, but these days, what's been going on in Romania, so in 2018, there was this vote, they were voting for these set of laws to, like, basically cover up theft and power abuses to make these transactions even more opaque to people. And this was the main criticism of the national liberals against the social democrats at the times, who were doing this for the people, just more corruption. And, they stopped it. And this year, actually, this month, they voted for the same laws. Now, the national liberals come into court, the exact same set of laws that now are meant to benefit them. So they're basically supporting the same ideology to a certain extent of this, personal self-servience for the party.
It's opportunistic disagreement more than anything else,
exactly.
Usually. Yeah.
And it shows that they don't have a fundamental disagreement in their ideologies. Their interests are the same, to just stay in power and commit abuses. And this actually shows that you don't even have a two-party system. You have one that kind of swaps from time to time colors.
Yeah.
Essentially, you can, when you model these two parties in terms of their strategic thinking, that it's not in their interest to backstab one another, right? Because this is a long, infinite game, and if you backstab them, then it's going to be a war to the bitter end, and then it's going to be a terrible equilibrium outcome in the future. So, of course, they will cooperate, and in the most subterfuge way possible, right? As long as we believe they hate each other, they're succeeding in terms of their messaging, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And when they operate in this way, in this clandestine way, you can essentially model them as one party, or at least as a 1 point something, right? It's a more of a fraction than anything. And
there's two aspects that
it's not despotism.
Two aspects that I find interesting. One that I would like to come back to is if we were to talk about design in politics in general, because I don't think that design as it is performed today in most of its instances is the proper way to approach politics. And the reason for that is that it has been shaped for transactional aspects of non-political, of non-democratic institutions, which are corporations and companies in general, right? So there's nothing democratic in most, in the most instances of companies and their organizations. They are actually the opposite, right? There's always a minority that holds the most power. There's always a minority that has the decision and that can do about anything, and there's always the majority that needs to, like in the hierarchical models that you can find in most instances, right? So design in this space has been shaped for that kind of circumstances, right? So even when we bring co-creation, we bring it in a form that is allowed in this kind of spaces, right? Because it has to work in these spaces given the constraints, which is interesting, right? But then if you take that as it is today and you bring it into political, then what happens, right? Would be interesting. I don't have like necessarily strong predictions, but they are not used to this kind of spaces, and so, it could increase, in fact, the disparities between the need for citizen ownership and politicians ownership. Like it could be really interesting.
So to your point, Kevin,
I'm just going to bring up a very old example because, like you said, democracy has not been redesigned in a very long time. So I have to come up with a very, very old example just to show a poignant point of how effective design can be in changing democracy, right? So when the founding fathers of America were trying to come up with the system for their constitution, they ran across a paradox, which was that if you have a big democracy, one of the fathers of democracy, the French political philosopher Montesquieu, says that democracies should not be big, because as soon as they are big, then a representative no longer is close enough to the constituents to make good decisions on their behalf. So the will of the people is diluted, right? And so there's a very huge argument, right? In the early days of the American system, the experiment of even having a federal system at all. Maybe it should just all be states, because as soon as you accumulate all that power, it just becomes just bad as a monarchy. But Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and this other guy, they wrote the French Federalist Papers, right? And it's a collection of 100 essays, and all just talking about why federalism is still a good thing. And one of the essays, James Madison, Federalist 10, he makes a direct counter-argument against Montesquieu. Really, it's just bullshit that comes out of his air. He's not critically thinking about it, but it's bullshit that's influential.
Yes.
And what he argues is that from a large republic, you get a high quality of candidates to choose from. So you don't have your typical 120 IQ people, you have your 160 IQ people, right? All of a sudden, from a normal distribution curve, so to speak. And that is an argument that is worth preying upon, right? Because all of a sudden you get an imagination, a vision, and a narrative of super intellectuals being heads of state.
Yes.
Now, that's not the case. That's not, in practice what happened. But
it was the case at the beginning, because the one who could do it was necessarily well-educated and informed people. By necessity, it created
they were talking about themselves.
Yes,
sure, that
exactly.
Worked. But as again, you have to be the role model before you do it, right? Before you even talk about it, before you even preach a narrative. And that's one of the key things too, is we need, so many market platforms and commercial platforms kind of expropriate our ability to self-organize and create new experiments. And without these experiments and without successful experiments, you can't have good narratives to talk about.
Yeah, but I'm really interested in the nature of what we are doing as designers today. Like it's philosophers that are influential over politics are like far gone, or not so many of them are left today, right? Some politicians try to be philosophers sometimes, but it's not ending well in many cases. But like as designers, we don't we have this idea about ourselves that we are like, some people think of, I'm trying to categorize like roughly, so mind the necessary oversimplification, but some designers find themselves in this kind of neutral position where they are trying to be observers and influencers at the same time, right? And some of us says, well, in order for design to succeed, we have to make the bold and strong decisions for the others. So we have to take a bit of this power and make it our own in order to achieve the kind of, good design vision we have in mind, right? Which is interesting now. So we become politicians ourselves, right? In that sense, but in both ways, we are doing that in the aspect of a transactional form. Like, we are helping companies to create value or give the illusion that there is some value in something, in order to extract this value from people in the form of transactions, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're doing the fox thing, right? Ultimately,
Yes.
look, the tiger will get hunted down eventually by the hunters. The hunters will kill the tiger eventually. We all know this.
Yes.
The thing is, if you met the fox at the right time, you live another day, right? That's all it really is.
So,
There is some value in living an extra day and living a full life, and really, like, again, like, you know, a fox left to him or herself is also subject to the elements as well.
yes.
Probably not hunted by, you know, hunters. Also, you know, could just fall prey to just not being able to hunt themselves, right?
Yeah, but my point in that sense was just that. But I agree with what you just said. But my point was just that we are in this, you know, circumstances that makes us work with tools that are shaped for transactional design, for something that, you know, needs to extract some value at some point, because this is where our place makes sense in this kind of, you know, landscape. Now, if we move to the politics aspect of, you know, designing policies and designing a political system and stuff like that, now these kind of tools are irrelevant in that space. Or if they are used, they can be harmful, right? They can create some like a system that tries to extract value from citizens. Would be, what kind of system would that be? I don't know, but you see, like, we are not equipped with the necessary means to deal with that kind of space. I don't feel like we are. So, like, we have some conceptual things that we can apply, but we don't have properly formed tool for that kind of space. Well, at least this is my understanding.
So I do think, though, that there is, if you have perfect access to information, you can track all the money that happens within political systems, you will have enough data and information to determine exactly what is going on, who the extractors are, and then the question is, are the extractors, you know, parasitic, or is it more of a symbiotic thing, right? You don't know. We don't know if the lobbyists are actually the real designers behind all of these things. You have to understand that, you know, we have to take a stance of we don't know, right? And but there's a lot to be inferred. Like, for instance, if things are not working and they're predictably falling apart in predictable ways, and you model it out, and you can infer some of the numbers and some of the information of who the potential candidate parasites are, you can make the argument that that on a percentage level, law of large numbers do not work in your favor, and an alternative does exist. But, you know, it is a, I would say it's a big reach to do that, simply because you put political capital on the line just to be able to be on a platform to make an accusation, right? Like, this is why there is this fake hierarchy of political branding that exists, so that you are not, if you're not in a position to criticize, you cannot criticize, and there is no criticism that reaches across the filter of media. And
Yeah.
So to that effect, it is basically a moat, right? Like, you're dealing with not just, you know, corporate business moat, but it's a real political moat that has been created. And so the political system itself, right, is an economic system worthy to extract. And as long as the structure exists, then, yeah, if I'm a business, I'd exploit it too. Hell yeah, because
it's configured in a way where it creates a veil of discord that shields me from being discovered, right? And so there
Yes.
is that influence layer, and that's worthy to exploit. But the thing is, so we could kind of take a very Marxist tone and just be like, okay, so everything's already exploited. Fine, capitalism has reached its tendrils across everything, and we can't go backwards. So political system has been abducted, right? So
Abducted.
so what next? Like, you have to go post-capitalism in a way, and there's plenty of things wrong with competition, because competition creates this sacrificial Moloch, right, so to speak. Like Moloch was like this kind of religion thing where you like in ancient times where you sacrifice your kids and stuff like that, and today we have this Moloch system, right, of
Yes.
competition. We sacrifice
Well,
children.
for some to win, you need many to die in the market.
Yeah.
Yes.
In fact, we love our precious children, but at the same time, we ask them to die and get sacrificed to the gods so that we may live, right, another day. And yeah, I mean, it's a perverse system ultimately. And we do see, different protocols that exist today, like Linux and open source networks, and these types of open source projects create better than what competition markets can produce. However, the main thing is, if we don't belong into those communities, we can't say, I was a designer here, I was a fox in this organization, I was a fox here and there. Only the foxes who were part of those have influence to say that, and they could make protocol changes by being a platform themselves and offering criticism. You have to understand, like James Madison and Hamilton, they didn't fight. Technically Hamilton fought, but he was more like an advisor, right? He was more of a white collar worker, but like they weren't necessarily soldiers in the front line. Soldiers in the front line had to die in order to, create the success of the American Revolution that was won. But they could hijack it by saying that they were foxes of a successful project, and then they use that as leverage for their story. Mm-hmm. And so, that's ultimately what designers have to do in terms of the business enterprise transaction nature, is not really to take money, but really just to leverage the ability to say I was a part of this, or I helped contribute in this way, and then you take that reputation advantage and bridge off of that.
Diana, you seem to want to say something, but no, at some point
I got so distracted. My ADHD just took me on a very interesting black hole of the internet. As I was listening to it, I was like, I need to find out what is the IQ of these politicians. And I stumbled on Donald Trump has an IQ of 156. He's a genius. Of course, I think it's bullshit. But like, apparently Angela Merkel has like 178, which is like, well, she has a PhD in quantum chemistry, so I guess. But like, it's so weird. I'm trying to find out, where did they get these data?
Yes,
like,
that would be interesting.
My IQ. I don't even know my IQ.
And you know what? For Trump, I'm sure it was a Twitter poll.
What was it?
A Twitter poll.
Oh yeah.
He asked his followers, how much I have. What do you think?
And now I found out that Adolf Hitler's IQ is 141. So it's interesting. I'm just looking at, and I'm trying to find out if politicians are smart. Some seem to be smart. They seem to have some higher level of education, like in Israel. There's India, maybe, and here and there. But
it tends to be true.
I would argue something very, very counterintuitive, and this is the point where I feel like you both will disagree with me.
And
Go ahead.
we can actually engage in this argument.
Go ahead.
But I would say intelligent people are the problem.
Yes, I agree with that.
And
Okay, so
it's not a disagreement here.
Diana on my side. So
Yeah, you have me too.
No, we both agree because I
Yes.
think what we treat as intelligence is something that, it's the ability to create problems and then solve them. And it's a game of it's the fake it until you make it. Stupid
and
people
extract
don't really fake it. They're too stupid to fake anything. They're just
and extract the narrative in your advantage. That's really the intelligence we have today is exploitative and is by definition predatory.
And it's arrogant,
Yes.
So I mean, I intentionally held this belief, and I intentionally wanted to provoke, and I happened to not do it.
You see, you went. Your intelligence led you astray. Yeah. Because, and I think another reason for this intelligence and why we really struggle. We want smarter people. We want competent people to see things from broad perspective and have emotional maturity and an ability to tell at least the fact that our values are myths, and these are just decisions that we made to kind of live and increase the quality of our experience. But this can, go in a minute. These narratives need to be handled. And we hope that the smart person has this ability to handle multiple narratives and make sure that while they may stay in disagreement, they can still coexist on some different levels. So, violence and aggression and destruction doesn't ensue. But at the same time, it's a crazy task because there's no even philosophy, the task of, we had 3,000 years or so of philosophy and we haven't figured out shit about anything.
But what you just said there, describes your yearning. I feel it too. You're yearning for a philosopher king, right? Like
yeah, but a good one, not the shit ones. The academia produces all of these. Oh.
Like maybe you wanted our Obama, right? You wanted Obama in a sense, but I also feel that one of the things is when you do have, I guess, a leader, even an all-powerful one, right? You kind of create an atmosphere that lulls the institutions that are supposed to check and be the checks and balance to that power to fall asleep, because they also fall into the spell, under the spell of loving that same thing, and therefore you end up getting a collapse either way. And so this is kind of the irony here too, is that smart people cast spells, because ultimately, and Kevin said this right, they do extract advantages, information advantages, because at the end of the day, no one has all the answers. We have bits and pieces of data. Some of us are smart enough to create information out of data, and even the smartest ones, with a lack of information, you can infer from the information that you have, the invisible ones. And it's that ability that actually creates narratives that might seem true.
But that's where to me it's like, I don't want to hold these people necessarily accountable for that aspect, because to me it's the system itself that favorize people with such characteristics. Like, no, it's not entirely true. It's a bad framing. It's not that the system favor them. It's that they are the ones that are able to.
Well, they have created the system, first of all, because they had the intellectual capability from the early phases of any democratic, any form.
To me, it's also. I mean, it's also contextual. I mean, some people have the same characteristics, but they use it in other spaces than this one, and they are not rewarded the same way for using their capabilities in different ways, right? So
so just to interrupt you a little there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just give you an example. We had one of the smartest university professors. He was like a historian. He was a walk-in encyclopedia, and he was the best opposition Romania has ever had in politics. He was fantastic. But then he tried to come to power, and he did a fantastically horrible job. He wasn't capable of doing anything.
Yes.
He was perfect at doing, just opposing. That was his ability to critically put people into check. And I think that's what smart people need to accept the roles that they're really good at filling, and making sure that if they go for something else, they have to understand that there's a level of incompetence that comes with it. Because, you don't always have an opportunity to check the things you're good or bad at.
I can tell you from my experience in companies, for instance, that people, for me, good managers are not the one that are good for what they are hired for, in the sense of, showing the results, creating a vision. For me, the good managers are the one that understand their people and give them space and support them, right? But in most companies, this kind of approach to management is not supported. It's not something that we reward. We reward people that are basically assholes, right? That they brute force their will to others, despite everything.
Most organizations, right, are execution organizations that are more downstream oriented, and so you need taskmasters and people who whip people, right?
Yes, and this is exactly why these kind of activities can be replaced, because a machine can do a greater job to listen to others and execute, in fact. So this is where automation is leading the way, right? Is replacing stuff that does not require other forms of intelligence we were talking about.
This is a really key, kind of like and this is where I think your topology idea kind of makes sense, is that humans are actually not very well conditioned to be on the upstream side of ideation. They're usually on the downstream side, because what do people do, right? As soon as they get out of university, they find jobs. So they learn how to execute, they learn how to do tasks, and they have not been accustomed to ideate and create upstream narratives and upstream projects.
Well,
right?
Not the majority of people, I agree.
Not the majority, right?
Yes.
But there is a case to be made that humans are not really meant to be on the downstream side of things. Now that so many things can be automated, and the motivation and the economic incentive is to replace the downstream stuff with capital expenses. Because here's the thing. The big narrative in economics right now is that there's a lot of problems. Let's fix them. And when you want to fix things, what does that mean? That means you pay a lot now, so then it's done for good. So you don't have to pay operations expenses. One capital expense does away with 20 years of operation expenses. That's like this. That's the pitch. That's the same business pitch in all of these, software companies. Is like, we're going to automate everything, and you're going to save so much money because you don't have to hire this person to do all that stuff, right? That's the same copy and paste pitch that is like in every single Zoom. Like, I would say like 80% of Zoom airtime is all about this frame pitch to a client nowadays, right? And so what we can expect is that not all of them will successfully pitch, but over time you can see probably maybe 90% conversion. And so you do need to educate people towards that the upstream side, because that's actually now, I think, what's kind of lacking. There's actually there's actually like a scarcity of clients. There's a lot of pitchers, and there's a lot of SaaS companies.
Yeah, in the automation space, I agree. I totally agree. Like the COVID event triggered like a reaction effect for this kind of companies, that suddenly people were at home, and it changed our understanding and our relationship to work. And this helped change the territory of what we understand as work, right? Even more so. Like, I'm not saying it was not present before, but clearly it changed the way we perceive work. And many people, like, I feel like the false narrative today is, in the continuation of what you just said, is we will replace people for work that can be automatized. So it will reduce costs, sure. But then people can hire their robot-like to replace them at work. And it's still automation, right? It fits in the same narrative, but it's a different story if you listen to it, right? Like, I will buy something that will do my work instead of me for someone else. It's not the same story as does someone else hire a bunch of robots that does the same thing that I was doing before. It's not the same story, right? In terms of outcomes. Because in one story, I have power. I have leverage. I still sell something as an individual, right? The skills I have transferred to my robots or whatever, but still an extension of me. And on the other side, the other story is about others having all the power and me having nothing, right? So now, where the space is leading, I will bet not in the direction of everyone has a leverage and, you know, and this is where it's interesting, like, because economically speaking, if you still want transaction in your system, which is the end goal of all of that, right? Production is an extension, like, pays people, then the same people who help produce will buy the stuff that we help produce, and the system auto feeds itself. Like,
let me reframe.
We eat what we eat what we made, right?
Yeah, we reap what we sow.
Yes.
Let me reframe your definition of transaction real quick. I would call a transaction as something where there is a measurable difference in utility function from a buyer and a producer.
Yeah, well, you are defining the nature of the transaction. I'm just saying, like, there's an exchange between two parties.
Okay. But, you know, a transaction only happens if, like, you know, somebody who makes something.
Yeah. I agree on that definition. I agree. I'm using that in loose terms. I agree with you. Okay. But so I'm just saying that if in the end everyone is, like, people on downstreams are replaced, which is the majority of people, right?
Yeah.
Then who buys what, to whom, for what reasons, and how all of that works? You know, like, you have to reinvent the entire system for it to work.
Well, so America has always been the demander of last resorts, right? We buy what people do not want. And here's the thing, like, Europe wants to play, well, I wouldn't say all of Europe. Germany wants to play supply side economics, and it's kind of destroying the demand side Europe and the rest of the world too. And it's not going to be successful being a surplus country and in a bigger, you know, framework, right? And again, I think you're correct. There is, I guess you could say, like, there's this type of more moralistic thinking where you kind of favor producers more than you favor buyers, in a sense.
Yes.
Like, and I kind of understand, right? Like, you kind of look at somebody with skills a little bit higher than somebody who just has money but no skills. But, you know, it's supposed to be balanced.
Yeah, I agree. I was just referring to, like, I had a discussion with someone that is into automation and he said basically that his vision of the future was a total replacement of designers, because automation of design tools is becoming so, ubiquitous that at some point that it's optimizing for one variable, which is maximum utility, right? In that sense,
utility of the client, actually.
Yes.
So it's actually more of a demand side tool.
And it's in any case, it's a dumb way to optimize just for one variable, right? You don't want that. Like you could say the end result is the destruction of the very reason for what this thing exists. Like the utility exists within a system that if you optimize too much for it, it destroys the very reason for which it exists.
Yeah, but in the next 100 years, atoms and bits will have to merge. And the question is are they going to merge at the middle, or are they going to merge closer to the atoms or closer to the bits? And if we're merging closer to the bits, then we're moving closer to metaverse, right? We're all going to have our headsets and live in shacks, right? And have our overlords determine how the sustainability of the environment should be and whatnot. And I mean, there has to be a merger between the two, because there is so much activity in the world of bits that if they were not translated to the world of atoms, or if there wasn't any kind of go between, then we have basically essentially bifurcated humanity. Right?
So what happens at the other end? Moving more to the atom.
If we're moving more towards the atom, then we just have a more of like a European type of renewable energy type of thing. You kind of one of the weaknesses, obviously, of Europe is that it doesn't have a lot of natural resources on its own, right? So like China can be an autarky. America can be an autarky. Even Russia can be an autarky, because it has oil and gas. It makes its own food. I mean, it makes enough food for like America and China combined, right? It exports food. Yes. Ultimately, that's what crashed the Soviet Union, was because they just couldn't produce food.
Yeah, but they don't produce it for themselves today. So
sure. They do it to actually create economic leverage.
Yes.
So, because they
and a certain sense of reliance, you get. For example, in Europe, you had Ukraine and Romania as the two major sunflower oil suppliers, and with the war, basically the fall went on Romania to provide whatever it could. So the prices and the inflation kind of rose, and it's just there's a little bit. It's not a shortage, but it's definitely a bit more. I don't know. The market has become more tighter, and it's actually harder to just cover all these needs, especially when you have this. You create some sort of economic leverage based on kind of your possibilities, but then some part of it crashes, and you can no longer supply because the demand is.
Yes, a good example of that is the U.S. during the COVID crisis. Like all the the issue of delivering goods in the US from other countries, because they are so reliant on other countries, not just to produce things that is consumed on their own markets, right? So for achieving what you just said before, Matt, and saying they can be an autarky, they need to recombine to adjust their market in an extreme way that they are just not able to do so today.
Right, but the US has the optionality.
Yes, I agree. Which is not the case for Europe. I totally agree.
Does not have the optionality.
Yeah,
and
a limited one.
Thing is,
limited one.
But another key point is also Europe being kept in the dark about informatics agriculture. That's actually a very key point in U.S. autarky as a strategic advantage. Because, the truth is, if you were to merge the world of bits and the world of atoms, and you have all the leverage in terms of like the intelligence involved, you could actually make all countries or all economic zones, like even Europe, for example, non-resource dependent, right? Essentially resource independent, by just basically doing all the right things at the right time, given the prediction of weather. You can optimize crop growth tenfold, right? It's the only reason why crops and agriculture is limited is because you have good and bad days, and that volatility damages the
But
health
you
of.
are still limited by the
Yeah,
physical laws,
exactly.
But
if
it
you
would
if
be
you
true
happen
even if
to,
you are in context of
yeah, and if you can
merge.
control conditions, you optimize for productivity. Like, for instance, like
Yes.
aquaculture, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you have like a bath of water where you grow fishes, and you just leave that bath of water, use geothermal heating, and keep it at like a very warm temperature, like 40 degrees. The fishes, when they get to adult size, actually end up being twice as big. So you actually get double the yield, and they even get there a lot even faster, right? Because they're growing as they're living, essentially, when they're asleep too. And so that's the crazy thing, is this is actually a common feature even in all agriculture too. It's not just in fish, aquaculture, but also in farm yields and everything like that. So I spoke to you too, and I'm like, wow, these designers really know their economics, but they really need to also apply this to all these other like more tacit knowledge stuff that doesn't sound sexy, but it actually is the real strategic underpinnings of success of a people.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I'm quite skeptical um, of the metaverse thing, but that's me. And just one point you mentioned, and after that, I think we can gently close our session. And Diana, I will let you speak. Of course, I'm sorry, I'm occupying so much space. But like I'm, if you look at the signals, at least if I look at the signals I perceive right now on this automation thing that we were just discussing, right, is that there's one tendency I tend to see, especially in the US market, one potential on the US market is to replace labor with another form of productivity that works better for them. And like, I'm not framing it well. It's right at the top of my mind, but basically, like, you could create a system that does not require labor to function, right? You could replace it with its ability to being automatized, for instance. Then, if you take a Marxist view, it alienates even more the society. Like, it's a new threshold, an extreme one, with all the potential negative aspect that you can foresee quite easily. Like, there's all the positive ones. Like, you could decorrelate population growth and population job allocation and stuff like that from actual economic production, right? Which
Yeah,
is
and
which
my
tends to be
answer to
like
that,
magical then
yeah,
for
but
most
my
economists.
answer to that is that the U.S. has already created this class of workers. This labor that doesn't actually produce, but it still functions, and they're the consultancy class.
Yes,
They're your marketers. They're
yes.
basically trying to create,
And the
a dependency on
and
brand.
what is an AI? What is an
Yeah,
automated system
exactly. And you
today?
know what?
It's a
They do
consultant.
have a very good function. They do serve a very strong strategic function, which is that Europe spent all of this resources subsidizing
Mm-hmm.
scientific brain power, right? You have all these scientists
And they're all going to the US now. They all want to get into this whole AI capital bullshit. So
because this is the only place where you can
in
make
one
business
generation,
of you can make business of
but in
knowledge.
one generation, the foxes stole, all your eggs,
Yeah,
all your assets.
yeah, I agree. It already exists in a form, and this is why I see it clearly can be happening in a new form. Like it can be renewed, and like basically, Zapier. I don't know the proper pronunciation. I see like ads all the time on YouTube recently, and basically they are selling their products, their service as which is automatization basically, right? Uh, exactly like that. I don't see a huge difference. Now, you still need people behind to operate this, right? But you don't need the same people, and you don't need as many people. So
Yeah, in fact, you don't even need intelligence to run this stuff, because the more data you have and
yes,
the more information you have, you don't need intelligence in order to infer information that you don't have, because you have all the information. And from the law of large numbers, Google already knows that about 15% of your audience, they leave every second your web page is loading. So there's a huge incentive just to get like your web page, boom, and that's the algorithm score. That's the Google, secret sauce there too, right? Everything is just optimized for just maximum traffic.
yeah. Diana, what do you want to say? What do you have in mind?
It's interesting, I guess. I mean, I feel both lucky and unlucky to be born, at this point in time, because there's so much color, so many possibilities and ways to explore it and see how things will transform, and also to identify this powerlessness that I have as a designer or person or whatever I am. The fact that I don't feel I have any say in how things will move, no matter how much I'm trying and how great my ideas can be. It's definitely a strange position to be in. You're almost like it's the universe does its thing with or without you. It doesn't really matter in the end on what's going to happen, whether it's going to be a better place for humans, because at some point we will all going to perish, whether it's out of hand, whether the sun explodes.
Niche, go out of this body.
But no, I mean, to a certain extent, I would be very eager to experiment with AI to a point, to create like a digital twin, of me. If you could replicate consciousness, which is the ideal of all this fiction AI stories, and to think about how you could interact with your own self and send it to work and then come back for revision, and we're like relearning certain things, and to create this, let's say, health around technology rather than to just replace yourself out of the work or the life that you're living.
Yes,
And I think this is a very hard thing to achieve, but it is possible if we try to
I agree.
shift a little.
Yeah, extensions of us. That's replacement.
True, yeah, like that. And also maybe I'm biased because I like creativity. I like to be creative, but maybe other people just don't like it. But I think, this would be the next frontline where everyone is given this opportunity to be creative, because manual labor, hard labor will be replaced by automatization, but that doesn't mean that humans will just turn lazy and useless. They can find
Agree.
pleasure in, let's say, bettering themselves or just finding higher forms of work that it's not doing systematic piece by piece, whatever.
So I would make a very quick response to Diana's like
pessimism, because I would say that there is a very good counter argument against pessimism, which is that a lot of problems are, even if you were to build all the technological tools, they are probably not even going to be solved because there is a systematic incentive that smart people have exploited that creates a dumb outcome. And this is the case with the American health system. Despite our yammerings about efficiency, we have the least efficient health system. We spend twice as much, and we actually have a 10-year lower life expectancy. And part of this is health equity. For one, we incentivize private insurers to insure the healthiest people in cohorts. And so then, of course, they pick all the healthy ones, and then the government has to subsidize all the unhealthy ones, and they get terrible health care.
Same for education.
Yeah, it's not preventative. Now, if you were to go on a preventative regimen and just look at everybody and just ask them, hey, you get on this treatment and that, there would be a long-term savings of 4 times, right? And immediately America would go back to where it should be as an OECD country. But because it's gone the other direction for so long, the cost to reconfigure the healthcare system back to normal would be astronomical, and no private company can do that alone, right? And then one of the key things is now that AI is being developed in healthcare, one of the dangers is that AI will entrench the outcome indefinitely, meaning that these companies who have clawed their way to this very high profitable model in which it's incentivized to create sickness in the population, it's going to be concretized now by encoding it under algorithmic conditions. And that's a very scary thought, right? So there is definitely I don't want to say ESG need, but there is an ESG. There is a social responsibility need where everybody clearly sees that American doctors are no longer paid to think medically, but to really just operate according to best practices according to insurance companies, right? They just have to follow the rules, write paper. They're wasting their time, filling out forms rather than actually doing clinical diagnosis. And here's the thing, that's one of the, if America stays this way, Europe does have the opportunity to create a different form of AI that is more inquisitive, that's more intellectually curious, and could actually explore the boundaries of human health. Because this is something that is, from an information perspective, it's completely unexplored.
Yeah, I do find interesting some examples that exist in Europe of use of AI to make, for instance, decisions in court and stuff like that about really sensitive topics, and was after investigation was dismissed as bad decisions when totally automatized, and actually Europe, in terms of legislation, wants to have assistance, AI assistant, not AI replacement. So it's more leaning in that direction, whereas in US they want to replace what can be replaced, and the case is made even for replacing doctors and their medical advices by algorithms, because if it's just following rules and filling up papers, well, this clearly can be automatized as well, right? So I agree. I'm not pessimistic in that. What you were mentioning is, of course, everything you were mentioning, you two, are of course obvious issues, right? But I also see how the landscape changes as people try new things in that landscape, right? And it's hard to say how, like, you can see like an event like COVID or anything else that can, move everything and redefine the territory in a new way. So I'm not so worried. I'm curious to see what can happen. There's of course there's path that you can see, that you can foresee could happen, but they are not like written, clearly not written, and things can be totally different. So I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, but ultimately, like, designers are consultants, right? And essentially in the business world, consultants are serial daters. You're business daters. You're constantly going on dates, and you're striking up conversations. You're learning you're learning something new after every date, and you bring it to the next date, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then the question is just like, is there a meaning to all of this? Like, all this dating, is there going to be is there going to be,
and he called me a pessimist and Nietzsche.
Yeah, no. Yes, there's a meaning, and this is one that it's not. Like I do feel like interesting, and we had this discussion with Jonathan on the Slack server about goals, and jobs to be done as a framework to frame things around goals. And to me, this is clearly an example of the current thinking style of business and AI as well. Is as soon as you have a clear goal and clear a means to achieve that goal, then it does not require anyone to do it, because you can process it, you can compartmentalize it, and you can automatize it, right? So I see possibilities to automatize about anything that can be potentially framed this way. But there's a lot of things that humans do that is not related to goals, that is not so clear in the outcomes, right? Diana's mentioned creativity, but it's just one aspect. Like, why are you doing, like, what are you skiing or surfing? There's no utility in that, right? Why are you meeting friends? Like, it's useless, right? Giving goals.
Why, as a woman, you're giving birth to children? You can just create an artificial womb, maybe later, because now we're too many. So
there's something like, I'm not necessarily this framing, but there's something experiential.
So I think that there's a distinction here. I'm actually writing an article on valuing, and there's a distinction between assigning value to something, or some deem as value, and creating value.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the times, everything that we consider as valuable might be an arbitrary choice. Well, this thing is valuable because, and then you justify it for whatever benefit it seems to bring to you. And that's how consumerism works. But then there's value creation, which is you're seeing some people in dire need, like, they are starving. And then you are trying to give them like a self-sustaining framework and a way to like really provide for themselves. And this is a value you create.
Yes.
You create value that can further generate value. Whereas with value assigning, sometimes there's a dead end where it's a closed loop.
Yes, I agree. Like I use the framing in organizations. I use the framing of autonomy, like providing autonomy to people. Is something that is beyond what you mentioned, like clearly stated goals, and where you can rationalize the value, right? As you mentioned. So I feel like it's interesting. There's also this notion of you find the value as you do the thing, right? So it's totally immersion, and so it cannot be anticipated. And cannot be clearly defined until it happens, right? Like having a good time with friends is not a function of having friends. It's something that emerged from it as you experience the friendship, right? You cannot expect that each time, but it happens, right? It's not exactly the same
And
thing.
you can have like experience of grief when you're
Yes.
suffering together. You're having this empathy bond, which is even more strengthening the friendship. So
Yeah.
it's the valuing is not one way, and it's actually very decentralized. No matter how much you're trying to tie it to a hierarchy of values,
Yes.
like it's been tried so far.
And you can see clearly that, you know, that this tentative of attempts of the business of spirituality is a form of trying to extract value from that kind of thing, right? Something that is intangible, and like the fact that some people try to reconnect with religion today because they feel like they lose meaning in their life is something that is interesting to observe, because it's exactly what we're talking about right now. It's this something that emerged, that gives sense, that provides value outside of value, in a sense of what we can say it's valuable today. That is totally intangible, and that that we are willing to pay that much for having it, although we know it's not a formulaic thing, right? And clearly this is something you can sell to companies, and they will be willing to cut their vein and bleed out all their cash if they.
I mean, one of the most valuable things right now that consultants do isn't even solving companies' problems, but it's really just listening to the manager and listening to the underlings and just combining it into one PowerPoint slide where the information and the data is condensed.
You make them find the solution to their own problem, and you just say
feed the shit right back to them. and that's actually what is actually polled to be the most valuable thing that consultants do nowadays, right? So it's a weird thing that, like, designers and consultants are all trying to like talk about all these big topics that are supposed to like solve billions and trillions of dollars, and we're all going for like the Nobel Prize of design. But really, like, what most people want is just like making sure that that the employees aren't going to quit because they're unhappy, and the employees are just trying to make sure that they're not fired for doing a bad job.
Yeah.
A bad job in which was kind of designed for them to be bad.
Yes, clearly.
And I mean, like, it's quite valuable to tell the truth in the right context, in the right platforms. Also, solving a problem is, and I experienced this quite a bit, is like you can solve the short-term problem, but if the culture itself or the values are not aligned towards solving it for the long term, your solution will just crash and burn. And so then, on to the next date, right? They blame you that you didn't fix it for them, really, and then you just go to the next date.
Yeah.
Learn from that experience. But yeah, I don't know. I think, look, like, I think there is also a structure in which you can try to be accretive at every single stage and every step that you take, which ends up creating a lot of bloat. It creates a lot of bloated architecture, but that's probably the most robust thing you can possibly create on the back end. The thing is, you don't have to show the bloat on the front end, right? You don't want to sell.
You hide it behind the curtain.
You don't want to sell the algorithm. What you want to do is just sell the selling, right? And but
so
you want
fake it until you make it. We come back again to.
Well, but the thing is, like, the reality and the complex reality of organizations are unique onto themselves, and if you want to create the template that fits universally onto them, then it becomes a very robust and unique template onto itself, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it becomes a monster to sell, because you're basically giving.
It doesn't exist.
you're presenting a complex thing to a client that is 4 times more complex than what they have already, right? Because you're trying to create an idealized version that fits all clients, and that doesn't exist.
Yes.
Another thing you can do is you can piece it all together in like separate parts, right? So maybe you cannot algorithmically create a big bloated thing in the back end as a model, but you could create, you know, the a more of an affect consciousness version, right? So you have all these little small anecdotes from all your serial dates, and then you can say, we fixed this by doing this. We fixed this by doing this. Because simple things resonate. Complex things, even if they're true, they do not resonate from the top down and the bottom up. It doesn't. You need simple things for there to be complete resonance. And I think, like, you know, just communicating that alone kind of also is a strategic move, right? You're basically also communicating that you're sophisticated enough to understand that you're not trying to solve their problem. You're just trying to listen. But you're educated enough to understand the processes that you could do effective listening.
Yes. This comes back to the notion of synthesis, which is not the same than conclusion. Today, we focus a lot in our organization on conclusion, which is decision-making, right? Processes, which is a convergent process that goes to one thing, right? Where a synthesis is the ability to keep the diversity, but make it something that is coherent, right? And in that sense, it's the power of, I would say it's one of the main power of design, and probably one skill of designers, not all, but yeah.
Well, the synthesis is, you know, you are trying to take diverse ideas and synthesize them. So you want to recombine them.
Yes, into a new thing that is, you know, like immanent of all these things that you are trying to combine together, which is a coherent narrative for all these different things that are different but fit into one single story, right?
Yeah, like Kantian a priori synthetic moral judgments, right? Basically, you know, it comes up with that you cannot lie, because if people do lie, then the moral structure of society would just break down. Like whenever it breaks down, then that is a moral law that you shouldn't do this, right?
Yes. I'm sorry, it's been 2 hours.
Yeah,
it was really awesome, but
yeah,
I'm getting really tired now because it was a long day today. But I really thank you very much, you two, for your participation. It's like each time you are here, both of you, it's always really interesting. So thank you very much.
We should, you know, take turns sometimes, and just I leave Matt on a virtual chalet day, and you know the conversation might be maybe shorter. So we're not in the same room. Otherwise, we take the whole day discussing.
Yes.